Hi everybody, welcome to Drag Racing's Golden Era. My name is Randy. I'm the editor-in-chief here, and tonight we have a real great treat for you. Kenny Youngblood, the drag racing artist, all-around artist, just a great guy, is going to be joining us here in just a moment. Throughout the course of this interview, I learned a lot of great little details about Kenny that I never knew before. One of them is that he is a drag racer at heart, and that's how he started out in the business, was actually as a drag racer. And he'll tell us that he's a drag racer through and through, first and always. And it's been a great interview with him. It's a very long interview, so this is the first part of a three-part series that we're doing with Kenny Youngblood, and you're going to find out just exactly how in-depth his art got, and also some of the very famous race cars that he was responsible for putting his graphics on. And so now it's my pleasure to welcome Kenny Youngblood to the program. I guess what we generally start out here with is, a general purpose kind of question, and that is, where did your interest in drag racing start? I know that you actually raced at one point, which I didn't know until I started doing research on you.
Yeah, I'm a racer at heart, Randy. And I sure love the name of your the program, the Golden Era, because that's what we grew up in, and so blessed to have enjoyed that. And there's some younger fans today that are interested in it and big fans of it. But man, what a time! And well, I was I was born into a family of artists. It's a perfect storm, Randy. My mother, my dad, my uncle were all very talented artists, and I inherited the ability from the hit. My parents and uncle, they were interested in traditional art subjects, portraits, landscapes, still life, and like this such. But I was always interested in mechanical things. So as I was a kid, I'd be drawing planes, trains, cars, mechanical things. Go-karts were just coming on the scene back then. I was a big go-kart fan, built model cars. And so I loved mechanical things. And I was blessed in that my neighbor, a kid, schoolmate growing up, John Kaiser, we were both in kindergarten, first grade. And his dad was a motorhead, where my dad wasn't really a motorhead. But George Kaiser was his name, wonderful man. And he was a Korean War veteran, and he raced on the lakes, and a real car guy. And so my enthusiasm far exceeded my knowledge. I really had very little mechanical knowledge. But he would take us out to the races. He took us to our first drag race at was it San Gabriel? Had to have been, I'm thinking 57 or 58. I know Tommy Ivo was at his single engine Buick dragster there, which was gorgeous. But prior to that, really, I have to give a lot of credit to my older brother, Gene, who would bring home car magazines. He was a couple years older than me, so I couldn't have been 10 or 11 years old. And he would bring home the Rod and Custom and the Carcraft magazines and the Hot Rod. And boy, I just loved looking at those books, sucked it up. And long before I ever went to a drag race, I was a fan of this amazing machines. And I remember George taking John and I out to the Pomona Fairgrounds years ago, before I ever went to a drag race. And I remember they had the Nesbitt's Orange Special dragster on display out there. That was really the first dragster that I saw in person, and man, I was so excited. And so when George took us out to San Gabriel there, that just did it for me. And the cars back then, a lot of them were pretty clunky. And here's Ivo with this glistening red and black and chromed dragster that just blew me away. I think they were running no fuel back then at San Gabriel, and I think Sear and Hopper they won the meet, I think, with the Blown Chrysler on gas, high gear only. And it was the first time I heard that sound of that Chrysler pulling down through there, and was hooked.
Well, so you actually, after this point, got into racing. You had what, a coupe that you guys put together?
Yeah, John Geyser and I, his dad, put up the money, and we bought a friend of ours, Jim Hughes. He had a pretty nice 32 coupe that he was building to run Be Altered with. He had the motor setback and everything.
Yeah.
And for whatever reasons, he wanted to sell it. So we bought that car and finished it up. And again, I began learning a lot about the mechanics of it from John and George. And George was friends with Kenny Harmon, built camshafts, and put his cam in there, and it had a wind 6 carburetor manifold on it. And, I remember we made a scatter shield, and to have a scatter shield, the rules were, very loose back then. It would just say scatter shield. And so we actually took a steel truck rim and cut it in half and put flanges on it and put that over there. And it probably was a pretty good scatter shield. And that thing was probably, 1/4 inch thick, but I don't know if it was cast or what. But anyway, that was our scatter shield. And we took out the race. It had the weak link was at like a 44 rear end in it and a 3-speed LaSalle transmission.
Wow.
And so we would, I don't know, take off in second with this thing. But that was my first trip down the 1/4 mile. And a race car was in that Deuce coupe, I think. And we're shifting gears here. I think it ran like 110 miles an hour, but that was flying for me. And unfortunately, so my friend John got his girlfriend in a family way, and George pulled the plug on the race car. So I wasn't about to quit. I was just getting started. So on my own, I went, I saw a dragster chassis for sale down in Long Beach, used chassis, and I went down and bought that. And quite a story to that car. I don't know how much time we got.
We got all the time in the world.
Did we?
Yep.
This is my first dragster, and not too many people know this story, but it was a Pete Ogden chassis. Pete was a good chassis builder, and it had an Eddie Potter body on it, and it had looked kind of like Perdone's car. It had a chute pack enclosure. It was a pretty nice looking body on it, and it was set up for Chrysler. It was the chassis, the front end, no rear wheels and tires that have rear end and brakes. There was something odd about the car in that it didn't have a motor plate. It just had a piece of tin behind the engine instead of a 1/4 inch motor plate like every dragster I'd ever seen had, but it didn't have one. At any rate, I bought the car and I put it together that way without a motor plate, just a piece of tin, and got used parts for it. I'd go up to Blair's Speed Shop. I lived in the San Gabriel Valley in California, and Blair's was our go-to spot, and I'd buy used parts for it. Again, my enthusiasm exceeded my knowledge, and so some of these parts I bought were really nice. Good block, good crank, beautiful set of ported heads, stainless valves. But some of the parts weren't so good. And when I needed the rods and pistons for it, I was up there one day, and there was a set of Don's boxed steel rods. Now, that's what they used to run back in the 50s, before they had aluminum rods. And they would take a stock rod and weld plates on the side of it. So this thing was really heavy and definitely not what you wanted to put in a fuel motor. But I had seen ads for Don's box rods and hot rods. So I thought, well, this must be the hot setup. I didn't know any better. So I bought these steel rods for the thing. And then one day I'm up there and there's a box of pistons, brand new, in the box. And they were really cheap, and they were the right bore and everything for my 354 Chrysler. And so I thought Don Blair had mismarked them. Well, truth was they were sand-cast pistons and not forged pistons. And I didn't know the difference. And so I buy these sand cast pistons and put them on top of these heavy steel rods and put them in that car. And you had to have a fire suit, which I bought a used fire suit, or somebody gave me one of the old aluminized cloth suits, which are really not much more than a cooking bag, you know. And so, and at that time, believe it or not, this would have been in, early 66, maybe 65. And boots were not required. They were optional.
Really?
Yeah. And so I thought, well, I'll save money. Screw it. I don't need no stinking boots, right? So about this time, a friend from high school named Kenny Smith, who was also Motorhead, Kenny one day says, hey, he says, I want to go partners with you and help you on your car. And I go, okay, great. And so I painted Youngblood and Smith on the cowl of the car. And I called the car the Vagrant. That was because when I first got it, I didn't want my parents to know I had it. So I would hide it at other people's houses. So I didn't have a home. So it's called the Vagrant. And so Kenny and I are finishing up putting this thing together. And just as I'm about ready to take it out for its debut performance, Kenny tells me, he says, man, he says, I want to build my own junior fuel car, so I won't be able to be partners with you anymore. I said, that's all right, Kenny. Good luck, man. In fact, I ended up painting his junior fuel car for him. And there are probably quite a few viewers out there, especially in SoCal Motorheads, that would know the name Kenny Smith, because he went on to, he and his wife hit the lottery, the quick pick lottery years ago, and to the tune of a lot of money.
Oh.
And he went circle track racing. He hooked up with Gary Ebling, another schoolmate of ours. And he's really done very well over the years. And he's kind of a legend on the West Coast in the stock car racing scene. That's my friend, Kenny Smith. At any rate, I left his name on the car and I went out to Irwindale to start it up for the first time. I hadn't started on the street or anything. And out there back in those days, you would push the car down the return road to fire it up. We didn't have starters on the cars. You push start them, and which was really a lot of fun. And I had all the time I'm building this car for, a year and a half, or I'm sitting in it pretending I'm driving and starting it. And because, start one of those things, push start is a little bit different than your regular car. There's no ignition switch. You turn off the ignition, you put the fuel on, and you push it down, you let the clutch out, bring up the oil pressure, open the throttle, count to 2, close it, hit the switch, wham, and they light up. And so I would practice doing that. And so we get out there. I get my neighbor friend to push me down the return road, and the thing fires right up, and it sounds really good. And Randy, I had this beautiful set of weed burner headers on it, big long chrome weed burners, man. They were nice. So the thing sounds really good. And so I bring it in the pits and let it warm up for a minute or so. And then I went to wrap the throttle a little bit. As soon as I did, the thing quit. The engine died. So I don't know. So we push it again. Same thing. Every time I hit the throttle, it quit. So we're standing there scratching our heads. And this gentleman comes over and he says, what's the problem? He says, well, it shuts off and it hits the throttle. He says, well, do you have a couple of 3/8 wrenches? Yeah. So he's over there, takes the barrel valve apart, and he says, well, you got the barrel valve in backwards. So it's supposed to go, it was closed. So he fixes that. We push it down, and oh man, it fires right up. And so we take her back, and we're going to make its maiden voyage for my licensing pass down the quarter mile. And I remember some SoCal fans might know Gary Reed, who was a very popular driver back then. He was one of the guys that was going to sign off on my license. And so we pushed down for my maiden voyage. Now, Randy, I got to tell you that I didn't care. I didn't want to win races. I didn't care about that, win, lose. I wanted to do one thing with that car, and it was smoke the tires. I wanted to, this is back in the mid-'60s when the top fuelers would smoke the tire. That's all I wanted to do was smoke the stinking tires. And so I go down there. And so this thing had it had a crummy clutch setup in it. And we'll get to that. But anyway, it was high gear only. So I go up there, I swing around for my maiden voyage, and starters out there. And I don't remember, they might have had a flag on a button back then. I don't know if they had a tree yet or not. And anyway, he flips the switch, and I rev that thing up, and I dump the clutch, and it bogs. It ain't smoking the tires. And I am bummed out, oh man. So we go back in the pits, and the guy that was helping us, he did a few things on it. We tried it again. It was just bog every time I dumped the clutch, And so we go back in the pits, and this gentleman says, look, he says, why don't I meet you out here? He says, I can tune this thing up better, and I'll meet you out here, and we'll go partners. I said, okay. And I said, what's your name? He said, Brian Smith. So I didn't have to change the name on the cowl. I said, Brian Smith, right? Okay, Brian, I'll see you next week. So we go out there next week, and he shows up, and we go to warm the car up, and Brian grabs the nitro jug, and he's pouring nitro in the tank. And I says, gee, Brian, I don't know that much, but I don't think these things will start when they're cold on straight nitro. And he was pretty hot-headed. Yeah, well, don't just do what I tell you to do. Okay. So we push it down. Well, it ain't starting. It's just won't start right. And so we pull in the pits, and he's all pissed off, and he's throwing wrenches and everything. And this other guy comes over, and he says, what's the problem? I says, well, it won't start. He goes, what do you got in the tank? I straight nitro. Oh, that won't work. He grabs the alcohol jug, and he tops off the tank with alcohol. And he says, try it now. We push it down, and wham, it starts right up, right? Then warm up, get back in the pits, let the thing run, shut off, and Brian's having a fit. Screw you guys. You won't listen to me. I quit. and he walks off, right? So the new guy says, had a car there. He says, look, I'm from Vegas. And he says, he had an A-fuel car like mine. He was trying to sell, had it there on the trailer for sale. And he says, I don't really care if I sell it apart or together. And he says, I've got some better parts on my engine than yours, better ignition, better fuel injection. And he says, why don't you bring it down to my house and drop it off this week? He lives in Huntington Beach, and I'll bring it out next week, and I'll tune it up, and we can go partners. I says, cool. What's your name? Fred Smith. So Fred shows up with the car the next weekend, and we push it down to warm it up. And anybody who's ever driven a dragster or a solid mounted rear end car knows that you're strapped in that thing really tight, and there's no suspension. You feel every little vibration. And when that thing is running, when it's hitting, man, it shakes your butt. And this thing was hitting like it never had before, right? And so we go push down for our qualifying run. And I think I got my license or whatever from the other runs. But anyways, we go to push it down. And so I'm still expecting this thing to bog, So we go up and stage it, rev it up, dump the clutch, and I am smoked in. I'm smoking. It's boiling hides, and I'm just ecstatic. I drive it down through there. I don't know. I think we ran like 170 or something, and so we bring it back in the pits, and we actually qualified for the show that night. So I was going to run my first race in competition, and there was it was like, I don't know, comp eliminate or something. My car wasn't a junior fuel car; it was a bigger cubic inch. So anyway, I was going to race a guy that had a blown DeSoto on fuel, a little DeSoto on fuel out there. And they had been having more troubles than me all day long. The thing didn't want to run either. And so I thought, well, maybe I can beat this guy. So we pushed down for my maiden voyage. And as I said, the clutch, the drivetrain in this thing I bought at Blair's, and it was used, and it came out of a gentleman's, had an Opel on fuel with a blown fuel Chrysler and Opel. His name was Les Barath. He was from Hungary. The car was called the Freedom Fighter. Probably look it up. Anyway, Les was selling all of his stuff, and so I bought the clutch driveline out of his car. Well, it was pretty much used up junk when I bought it. I put it in the car, and it actually had an in and out box on it, or I think I bought an in and out box, which again, Hot Rod Magazine back in the 50s, guys would have in and out box. So I thought, well, that's cool. So it had this used up clutch and this in and out box, and the car had a big Olds rear end, or Pontiac rear end, but it had a pretty small, it just had a U joint on it and wasn't that big. Anyway, so we go up there for that first pass, man. I'm so excited. And the blown soda's over on the other side, and I go up there and rev them up, and the guy drops the flag, and I dump the clutch, and wham! It broke every part in that drive line. It broke fortunately, it didn't hurt me. Nothing came out, but it broke the clutch. It broke that in and out box. It split the companion flange on the rear end. Everything just wham! And it was so violent when it broke that the car did not move an inch forward. It just hopped off the ground about 2 inches straight up, right? And it locked up the engine, stalled the engine, and it jumped so hard that the parachute fell out. So here I am now to really top this off. The guy in the DeSoto next to me does the same thing. His parachute didn't fall out, but we both were up, and neither of us moved an inch, and it's silence. And then I started to hear this chuckling and laughing up in the grandstands, louder and louder. Pretty soon the whole grandstands are roaring, laughing. You know, that was my my debut driving. So we drug it off the track, and we put a better clutch in it. And of course, you know, looking back, there was guys along the way, no matter what you do, that help you out. And one of those was Bill Hayes Clutches, down in Midway City, California there. And because I took that clutch down to Hayes Clutch, it was a Hayes Clutch. And Bill looked at it and he says, "Where'd you get this?" And I said, "Well, I got it from Blair's Beach Shop. You know, it came out of Les Perez's car." "Oh, well," he said, "I can't let you run this." He says, "This is a cast flywheel. It's not safe." And he says, "I've got some used parts back there, Ford flywheel and stuff." And he says, "They're used, but they're better than what you got. And I can't let you run that." I said, "Okay." So he put together a nice little clutch for me. We got the thing, drivetrain fixed. And we went to the races with Fred tuning and me driving. And now all this time, Fred had never taken the short block apart, that thing. He didn't know that it had these junk rods and pistons in it. And so he's tuning it up, and he was pretty sharp. We just kept going faster and faster. We were 168, 170, 172, 175. Went down to Phoenix and won the AHRA Winter Nationals at Beeline.
Wow.
And we came back and go out to Irwindale, my home track, ran 175. We were out there the next weekend, and I take off, and that thing smoking the hides, and it's really pulling. And I'm thinking, man, I'm going to break 180 miles an hour in this thing today. I know it. And I get about half track, and those pistons said, "See you later," disintegrated. Those steel rods cut the block, the pan, everything in half.
Wow.
Caught the oil on fire. And so I'm suddenly in a ball of fire. The shrapnel knocks that piece of tin out from behind the motor where there was no motor plate. And the fire's coming right up inside the car, man. I got no boots on. It's coming up my pant leg, oil fire, very hot. So I had never been burned before. I can tell you this, that at first, it's you feel the stinging, burning sensation like you would imagine. And I'm trying to pull my legs back out of the flames. And then after just a few seconds, you don't feel anything anymore. Well, it's because it burns the nerves off. You feel it, but I knew I was still getting burned. And so I hit the parachute. It burned off. I got on the brakes. They were too hot. They faded. Fortunately, I was only half track or less when this happened. So I did get it stopped and got out of the car. And I knew I was burned pretty good. And the ambulance driver come running over and goes to grab the zipper on my fire suit, and it burned his fingers. And a friend of mine was racing a stalker out there, and he was down there and came running over. And I mean, I don't want to get graphic, but took my gloves off, and the skin, with burnt skin, was hanging out of my sleeve. And so I had burns. You could see the silhouette of where I was sitting in the upholstery. It's burned around it. And every place it was exposed to air, like around the back of the helmet, back of my neck, was first and second degree burns in various parts of my body. But my ankles were torched, man, 3rd-degree burns on both ankles.
Wow.
And they took me up to Santa Teresita Hospital and give me a shot of Demerol, and it didn't hurt anymore. And my doctor elected not to do skin grafts on me, just let the skin grow back. So that took several months, actually, for that to happen. And really didn't feel any pain, except that when you're doing that, they have to come in and clean the wound, which is pretty, And so while I was there in the hospital for a week, there was one guy from the track that would come visit me, and that was the track manager. His name was Steve Gibbs. And I just known him casually out there, but he would come see me every few days, see how I was doing, make sure. And that said a lot about Steve.
Steve's a great guy, one of a kind.
So anyway, I got out of the hospital, and we actually started building. Before I was out, I was drawing pictures of a new car that we were going to build. And it was, we wanted to build a Woody car, Woody Gilmore car. We didn't have money to buy a Woody car. So I knew a friend had a Woody car, and I measured every tube and angle on that car. And I did up a blueprint drawing. And Fred Crow, Allison and Crow, they're in junior field. Fred Crow's the safety equipment. Well, he used to race. And his guys fabricated that frame for us. And it was a Woody car. It handled, it was a beautiful car. However, in the meantime, I had quit, dropped out of Pasadena City College because I wanted to go drag race, and then I was bored to death at school. And this was 1967. The Vietnam War was raging, and I got drafted.
Oh, did you?
And yes, I did. And so I love my country. I was willing to serve. I wasn't really excited about it. It wouldn't be my preference, but I was willing to do it. And so I went down to the LA Induction Center, which is an old office building that they were using. And initially, they passed me. And looking back, I think it was just to make quotas that they were. And then they said, okay, pack your bags, you're going in the Army. So I packed my suitcase and kissed Mom goodbye and went down again. This time they put us through again on a much tighter scrutiny on the medical deal. And I have to confess, I kind of played devil's advocate when they were going through the medical line. There was, I had already learned not to volunteer for anything. And so there was a couple guys in front of me, and the one kid in front of me was this Hispanic kid, and he had broken his arm, and it had never been set properly. His arm was all crooked, screwed up, So he goes in to see this one doctor in his little cubicle there. And this doctor's making him do all this stuff with his arm and everything. And I'm thinking, I don't want to see that doctor, because this kid obviously couldn't shoot a rifle. And so I waited till the other doctor took a chance and went and seen him. And he says, well, what happened to your legs? And I told him, firing your. Well, does it hurt? And so I'd say, no, I can stand for 3 or 4 minutes at a time, no problem. And he said, well, what about if anything's touching you? I said, well, as long as it's not right on it, it's no problem. And so he's taking out his, and he says, okay, follow the yellow line. Well, I went to the back door. They had not 4F, but for whatever it was, I wasn't inducted because of those burns on my leg, right? And so I thank God for that fire, man. If I would have had the right rods and pistons or motor plate or boots, I'd probably gone to Vietnam. Might not be here today.
Yeah.
So God works in wondrous ways. He didn't want me going, and that's how he kept me out of that army. And the pain is long gone. The scars are still there, but his purpose remains to keep me out of there. So that was my first car. Then we went ahead and campaigned that second car, and I got a good fire suit and boots this time.
Yeah.
And of course, and we ran pretty well with that. And it was a real thrill in driving those things. And yet deep down, and I did a good job. I would leave and do everything I was supposed to. But deep down, I knew that I wasn't really cut out to be a race driver. I felt like a kid with his hand in the cookie jar, you know. But it was a real thrill. And I remember being at San Fernando, which I like because of the terrible traction out there. These were no prep tracks. And you could smoke the tires from one end to the other without even giving it full throttle, you know. But I remember racing Larry Dixon Sr. out there for Top Fuel. On Sundays, they wouldn't fire a car until noon, I think, because the churches, the local churches, and then they just had one qualifying and then eliminations and just a 4-car show. Anyway, I raced Larry out there, and he had a blown fuel. I'm injecting him, so I tried to cut a light on him, and I red lit. I guess one of the few times I red lit, but anyway, it was a real thrill driving those things. And you know, stuff happens. I mean, I've had chutes not open and oil downs and a fire and a couple of fires, you know, but it was a real thrill. However, like I said, I decided that I would be better off painting them. And in the meantime, I had met, I had a dear friend up in Pasadena, Gary Messenger. And I met him when I was going to college there. And I was working actually in aerospace for Boutea Corporation, which was since bought out by Parker. And we actually built Boeing flight controls. And I was the in-house tech illustrator back then. No computers, everything was hand-drawn, so I would do the assembly drawing. Anyway, I was going to PCC then, and I would go with some of my friends to some of the fraternity parties, you know, and they were good. But then it came time to pledge, and that wasn't me, man. I'm not gonna, you know, put around my head working around campus, you know, give me a break. So I wasn't gonna do that. So I meet a friend at work there at Boutea, and he says, "Hey, you got to meet my friend Gary Messenger." He says he's got a car club, and you don't have to do any of that stuff. You got a cool car, you're in, you know. So I meet Gary, and he's got a club called the Condors, and I had a really beautiful 57 Pontiac Safari wagon back then, and so I joined up with the Condors and meet Gary, and he was totally into cars. In fact, his nickname was Cal Worthington, because his yard looked like a car lot. And anyway, Gary, great guy. So I had my dragster. Well, Gary's brother-in-law was John Poindexter, who teamed up with Hippo and Poindexter car.
Yeah.
And that was Gary's brother-in-law was John Poindexter. And so Gary actually drove that car one time down lines, and then Gary bought a B-fuel dragster from Bob Brooks, had an injected DeSoto on fuel. And Gary was racing that car. And Gary had me paint the car. He had it painted by a professional painter, Dick Olson, down in Bellflower, California. And Dick wanted to have Tom Kelly do the lettering. And Tom Kelly, for those who know, was the man and still doing it. And just everybody tried to imitate his work, just beautiful. And so Dick wanted to have Kelly letter. And Gary says, I got this friend of mine that I want him to do it. It was me. And so I lettered the car. Well, it was called the Hippie. This was back again in the late 60s. And the Hippie thing was big then. So I did a little cartoon character. If you go to my website on Fine Art America, there's actually a picture of the Callaway car. And it's got this little hippie, and he's smoking a joint, and he's got glasses on, stuff, which was cool back then. And so I lettered it up for him. Came out pretty good. Well, he took it back down to Dick's to get the clear coat put on it. And Dick saw my artwork, and he called me up. He says, "Hey, I want you to come to work for me. I'm tired of standing in line at Tom Kelly's." So I went to work for Dick. And so to this day, I always told Tom Kelly, I said, "I got to thank you for being so good. That's how I got into the industry, because they don't want to wait in line for you." So and from there, so Dick Olson was partners with Don Kirby. And at the time, their shop, they did custom painting, but they also did fiberglass work. Don was a fiberglass guy. They did Corvette repair, a lot of Corvette repair and fiberglass work. And then if somebody brought in a hot rod to paint, they would do the custom paint on it. And so the first cars that I did down there were for local Long Beach guys. I think maybe Butters and Gerard, did Dean Engineering, Don, the real Don Mad Dog. What's his name? Escapes me. Anyway, McKenzie, Mad Dog, Don McKenzie, Dave McKenzie. Yeah, his car. I think John Collins drove for him back then.
Yeah, I know who you're talking. I know who you're talking about.
Local guys, and so Kirby builds the Beach City Corvette, and he builds it right there in the shop. In the meantime, I go down Lions Drag Strip, and I was actually a Top Fuel guy. I was totally against the funny cars when they first hit. Screw those funny cars. I want Top Fuelers. That all changed one night down at Lions. I went down there, and actually it changed at San Gabriel. I saw Don Gay was there. It was blowing Pontiac, maybe racing Jungle. I don't remember. But to see and hear those funny cars, man, with the weed burner adders, oh man, that was the greatest. And fans of today have no clue what how they performed, because they had, as you know, coilover shocks, full suspension on all corners, and with an automatic transmission with a blown fuel motor. And so between the automatic tranny and the full suspension, that fuel motor, that thing would sit there and it would rock like an animal. Whoop, whoop, whoop. And they'd go up and do a burnout, and whoop, and they'd back up, whoop, 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 and it was just so nasty. And I just fell in love with it. So I'm down at Lions there, and the Invader Corvette was there, Mike Van Sant, Glenn Solano. And that car, it was just cool looking, and it really would rock and roll. And so I was a big fan of the Invader. Well, as it turns out, they ended up working on that car out of Dick Olson's shop. Invader funny car was in there. So I got to, not only I got to know Mike and Glenn, but I became a crew member. So I would go down Lions and work on that car, which is a whole nother set of stories. We could be here all night. And so I've just let her in the Oakland. And so then Kirby builds a Beach City Corvette. Pat Foster was working for Woody Gilmore then. I remember going over and seeing that car in progress and Pat working on it. And at the time, Pat's goal, because that was kind of a transitional car. I think it had coilovers on the front, but I'm pretty sure it had solid mount rear end in it. And they were kind of switching over to narrower chassis, and it's kind of transition between the modern day cars and what they had then. And Pat was on a mission to build a really lightweight. And he had the idea of, to save weight, instead of putting spray Bastine and brake or hard brake lines on it, hard line or stainless braided, that he would put nylon brake lines on the car to save weight, right? And Pat Foster, gosh, what a wonderful guy, and the best storyteller in drag racing. And he said that one day they were at Lions or something, they had a little flash fire, and he grabbed the brake handle and it was just mush. And he immediately knew that those nylon brake lines were not the way to go. And that's why that steel replaced that. But Don Kirby was a master of candy colors, and he painted that Corvette candy red lacquer. And And he says, Kenny, you know, you're learning a lot at the lettering. And because when I went to Pasadena City College, they actually had a sign arts class, one of the best in the country. Well, I didn't think I was going to be a sign painter. I took, you know, fine art classes. And as it turns out, here I am trying to work as a sign painter. So I learned it mostly from watching other guys. I'd go up to Blair's, and Jack Burr would be there, gold leafing and stuff. Man, I'd sit there and watch him do all that. Dennis Jones, Dennis Rickliffs, and I'd watch these guys work, Steve Feinberg. And so I was learning the hard way. And Don says, he said, I want to have Steve Feinberg letter the car. And I say, hey, great. So Steve Feinberg comes over. And for those in SoCal that knew Steve, real character, wonderful. I got a little short Jewish fellow and very talented, had a unique style. He could spot his stuff, really clean. Anyway, Steve comes over and he lettered the first Beach City Corvette. And I learned more watching him than I had ever learned before, all of his techniques and things. So, of course, they went out and ran that car. And Kirby loved those Chevrolets, you know, big block steel Chevrolets that Beach City Chevrolet dealership sponsored him, and they'd give him those 427 Chevy blocks. Yeah. And the blown fuel Chevys, to those fans out there that have ever heard them or raced them, they're loud as hell. They're louder than a Chrysler, and they make power. They haul ass. They just don't live. And so Kirby would blow this thing up, and of course they burned up that first car. And we built the second car. And I got to letter the second car. And it's the one that if you see pictures of them, the one I did back on the driver cowl, it has a CF logo on it. That was Dick Olson's shop. Okay. At first didn't have that. But so we lettered that car. And then one day the phone rings at the paint shop, and Dick says, hey, Kenny, it's for you. It's Jungle. And I says, Jungle? Yeah, Jungle Jim. So I go and answer the phone. Now, back in those days, younger fans would know, but they didn't have national events. We were just getting started. And so the funny cars would match race. Yep. And this, of course, was during what I call the great funny car boom of the 70s. There was hundreds of them. Yep. And oh man, what a show they would put on. Oh yeah. They had automatic transmissions, and plus there was no burnout limitations. You could do 10 burnouts if you wanted to. And so back then they would all do 2 burnouts. They would do a big long smoky burnout. They back up, and then they do a dry burnout, and do dry hops, and it was just a real show. And so in the wintertime, the touring pros like Jungle, they would come up to Southern California to build a new car for the next season. And most of them would stay at the motels across the street from Disneyland. The Marco Polo, the Pitcairn were 2 of their favorites. And if those walls could tell stories. And so they would just hang out there until their cars were ready. And Jungle, however, he had a little class. He would rent an apartment while he was out here. He wouldn't stay in a motel. Low life. So he had his own apartment. Anyway, he calls me and he says, Kenny, I'm building a new car and I want you to paint it or letter it for me. It's okay. The thing is, it's down at my friend's shop in Garden Grove. You got to do it down there. I said, that's no problem. I'll come down there Saturday. Okay. And he said, I want it to look just like my old car, which had the gold leaf Jungle Jim on it. And so I bought the gold leaf and everything. I go down there to the shop, and here's Jungle's old car sitting in the corner, all beat up. Here's a brand new one. The shop was Jack, a Bear Green, knew him as Bear. And his partner, Renee Blixt, had this shop. And across the street was Tommy Kewen and Tim Beebe's shop called The Cave. And at any rate, and they were over there playing cards. Back in the day, when these guys would race for match races, they get paid cash. And they would have just a lot of cash on these. And Jungle was playing poker over there, but that was the going thing. These guys would gamble all the time. And he'd come over every 20 minutes or so and check out what I was doing. He saw one that looked just like the other car. So I took tracing paper and I made a pattern, pounced it on the new car, put it on there. He'd come over and look. And so I get the gold leaf on there and it just came out beautiful. And I'm putting a black outline around it. And Jungle comes back in and he says, well, you're going to have to take that off. And I go, how come? And he says, well, I told him, he says, I want it just like the other car. I said, well, it is. He says, no, it's a 1/4 inch too low. And on the side of that was a Nova or body water. They come down and had a break and it went under like this. And on the old car, the bottom of the J was right on that line. And on mine, it was a 1/4 inch over that line. And so I told Jungle, I said, well, you're right. And I took my paint thinner and washed the gold leaf off there. And he whips out this big wad of cash and he says, well, here's for your gold leaf. And he gave me like twice what I was going to charge him for. And so I says, well, I'll be back Monday. Oh, okay. So Monday I went and got some more gold leaf. I come back, come in the office and he sit back in a chair and he saw me about fell backwards. And he says, well, I didn't think you'd be here. And I said, I wasn't in the right place, Jungle. And I don't know if he was just testing me or what, but I must have passed this test because after that, we were like buds and he would call me in the middle of the night playing his harmonica and we were great friends after that. And so that was the first big name car that we did was Jungle. But then it just went crazy at Dick and Don split up. Don Kirby opened his own shop next door there. And it was Camelot because there was just hundreds of these cars. And most painters, custom painters, I won't name names, but a lot of them were drunks or druggies or both, and very unreliable to get your car done. And whereas Don didn't smoke, didn't drink, didn't do drugs, hard worker. He'd get there at 7:30 in the morning and thrash on these cars, getting them prepped and paint them, and 3 or 4 in the afternoon, he's out of there. And then I would come in at noon or so and work half the night, whatever it took to get them lettered. And so guys knew that they could come there. The cars would get done on time, that they would look nice. Plus, we were doing the airbrush grills on them, which I wasn't the first. Tom Kelly actually did the Hot Wheels cars and kind of inspired me. Before that, they would just paint them so, right? But I'm more of an artist than a sign painter, so I would airbrush the headlights and stuff on there and do them a little bit nicer than the other guys. I look back at the work I did and I cringe. It was pretty grim, but we were an overnight success. And pretty soon that car is just stuffed with funny cars. And people have seen the pictures of Don and Nat quick. Nat came in later. I was so busy. I brought Nat in to help me. He was working for Cerny. He had taken me in to help him down there, and we all kind of worked together. And people have seen that picture of the parking lot with all the funny cars sitting out there. And
yeah, that's the picture with Nat Quick. There's 2 people in the parking lot looking at that camera, if I remember right, isn't there? There's a whole bunch of funny cars behind them.
Yeah, the one picture, the color picture is Don Kirby with Nat.
Okay.
And what happened was I wasn't there that day because I was down at the studio designing them. And what I had back then, talking about people that help us along the way, my mentor and a wonderful friend to this day was Bob Cashler. And it's a name that most people have never heard, even in racing. But he was really a genius. And back in the day, Don Kirby knew Bob, and he's told me, he says, you got to meet my friend Bob. He says, he's an artist too, but he does more than that. Well, he was a marketing guy, but back then they didn't have the term marketing guy. He was a guy that got people sponsors, and he was good at that. And so I meet Bob at Kirby's one day, and he told me that he wanted to put together a one-stop creative shop for the racing community, which was a genius idea. Under one roof, where a guy could go and get a proposal written, could get a rendering done, could get a press kit done, all under one roof. And he called it Racing Graphis. Bob was German, and the word graphic in German is Graphis. So it was called Racing Graphis. And we rented this office space at 1030 North Pine Avenue. And I had one of the offices in there. And I was the in-house artist. And the problem was that nobody really knew me. Bob knew everybody, but I was an unknown. But Bob introduced me to, he would call Mickey Thompson and Parnelli Jones, says, hey, I got a guy who can do proposal renderings for us. And so he introduced me to a lot of the racers, and I began doing the proposal drawings for sponsorship proposals or paint schemes. And again, there was so many cars. This was full time. However, it started small. When I was 15 years old, Randy, I was sitting at the kitchen table drawing my favorite subject, which was slingshot fuel dragsters. And my mother walked by. She looked and she says, someday you get paid for doing that. I'm at the time thinking, that's crazy. Who would ever pay somebody to draw a dragster, right? But just a few short years later, that's what I was about to do. I had lettered him, but now I was down there at the studio, and Bob called me one day and he says, Kenny, I got a job for you. Really? He says, yeah, a guy wants a Corvette funny car, wants a rendering of a Corvette funny car. Great. So I meet with this guy, and he tells me what he wants, and I do my best on this rendering of this funny car for him. And he comes down to get it, and he was very pleased with it. And I remember, Randy, that I charged him $40 for this drawing. And I remember that amount because about a week later, and so I thought, oh man, I've made it. Mom was right. I'm getting paid to draw race cars. A week later, his check bounced. So it was welcome to drag racing, but it got better from there. It got a lot better, and pretty soon we were just doing tons of stuff. And so,
but this is kind of a transition for you then, right? From just doing pure lettering and
yeah. Well, I was transitioning. I had two jobs for a while. I would go down to the studio and do drawings and designs and renderings till 4 in the afternoon, 4 or 5. Then I'd go up to the paint shop and letter the cars till 1 or 2 in the morning.
Oh.
And so this was I knew I had to make a choice. And I knew, as much as I love the sign shop, as much as I love making those cars look good to this day, I knew that the studio was fuller use of my abilities. And so that's when Nat pretty much took over for me, and I was down. So that day they took that picture of Don and Nat, and I was down at Racing Graphics designing. And in fact, I designed several of the cars sitting behind them there. And but there's some other black and white pictures that Steve Reyes took of the cars out in the parking lot, and I'm actually in one of those pictures.
I think I've seen those pictures.
And he's in used car. But it was a wonderful time. Don Kirby was a great friend, and I got to tell you that when he wanted me to come letter the cars for him, he said, "Look, Kenny, I don't want you to work for me. I want you to work out of my shop, but you work separately from me. The guy comes in, I give him a price for a paint job, you give him a price for the lettering, and we work separately." Because Don, God rest his soul, he could be a little edgy with the money. And he said, I want us to always be friends. I really want you here. And he says, so use his shop. And so we worked separately, and it worked great. And I could tell a whole bunch of paint shop stories. But that was the golden era. And I always loved painting cars for guys that really cared how they looked. That guy that wanted best appearing car as much as he wanted to win the race or more. And that was the guy I loved working with, because you could, they really appreciated what you would do.
Well,
And
Kenny, and I have to just inject this here for a second. I don't know how many of those funny cars in the 70s that you were responsible for, but when you look at that era of drag racing now, with the wraps that are put on, that to me are just sterile. Back then, those cars were, it's the reason why people love them so much. They were works of art. They were literally works of art. And I know that you were responsible for a lot of that.
that's absolutely correct. And that was, again, a big part of the popularity of the cars, was the way they looked, and they had names. Didn't have a corporate sponsor on the side. It was the LA Hooker. It was the Chi-Town Hustler. It was the Jungle Jim, and so they had personality. They had these cool paint jobs, and so and then the performance out there, man, it was a show, and yeah, that was fun. At first, I was Kirby would design most of his own paint jobs, and pretty simple stuff, panels and flames and this and that. But when I got on the drawing board, I could kind of let loose. And most painters, they're not artists, so they just can do the basic stuff. But we started coming up with some unique things. One of them was Al Segrini's Black Magic, and Al was one of those guys that, man, he wants his stuff nice. And so he says, I want it to be black. It's called Black Magic, and it's a Vega slant nose body. And I said, man, those are all great ingredients. I love black cars. And the name was Trick. And I says, and so I came up with the Black Magic design. It really hit it out of the park. Of course, it had the orange, red, yellow stripes on it. And when people talk about most beautiful cars, funny cars, and history of sport, that's usually one at the top, if not the number one car.
Oh yeah, Al Segrini. As a matter of fact, he's going to be joining us here in a couple of weeks. But that car comes up repeatedly on our Facebook page with people talking about what a work of art the Black Magic car was.
Yeah, yeah, it had everything, and I painted it. And back then, I remember the magazine editors, and of course, the car magazines back then. You had Hot Rod, you had Drag Illustrated, you had Carcraft, and the funny cars were depicted on those magazine covers a lot. And they would say, "Well, we won't put a black car on the cover." Well, Black Magic wasn't all black; it had just the right amount of color, and of course, the black accentuates the color. Anyway, it was on the cover of 3 magazines in the same month, and I could always tell how well we did on the design by how widely it was imitated. And certainly after that, boy, you saw a whole bunch of cars with Black Magic zigzags on them, and so that was very rewarding doing that car. And then we did Don Prudhomme's Army cars, and the Army graphic was a whole different thing. It was much more corporate looking. But
the one that's sitting behind me, is that one of them that you did?
Yeah, that's it.
That's it.
That's it. And yet it was ahead of its time. Before then, believe it or not, it's not a big deal now. But that was the first car where the graphic wrapped over the roof. Before that, they didn't. They had something on the side, and that was it. But this wrapped over, and it was just a clean design. Very pleased with it. And of course, there's a story that goes along with that car. If the snake will forgive me for telling it one more time, but Bob Cashler, my mentor, helped Don put that program together with the Army. And prior to that car was his Hot Wheels cars. And the Hot Wheels cars, if you look at them, the snake on the side of the car was powder blue with polka dots.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. And I thought, man, I'm not putting that powder blue polka dotted snake on this. Gay for me. So I thought, so the good Lord above guides my hand. It gives me every idea I have. gave me the idea of the Stars and Stripes snake. And I just knew it was a winner. I drew it up and I sent it over to Bob, and he loved it. He said, well, I'll show Don. And I don't hear anything. I asked Bob about it. And, well, Don was very conservative, which is good. I'll win a lot of races. And I called Don and I said, Don, I mean, you don't want to use this? And I'll do my snake impression. I don't know, man. Everybody likes my polka dotted snake. And so my heart just sank. Man. I go, oh, no. So the Kirby painted the first car was a Vega. And it actually ended up over my house. I was going to letter it at my house for some reason. There, Kirby was out of space or something. So they brought the body over there. So I'm doing the lettering. Well, Don Verdone comes over to go over where he wanted the sponsors placement, the logo decals. Everything was hand painted, all those decals. And so we're going over that. And finally, the last thing was the snake. And I says, now, Don, we are going to put this Stars and Stripes snake on here. I went, I don't know, man. Everybody likes me. And I says, look, and I felt my blood pressure go up. And Don, forgive me because I says, Don, this snake's going on it, or get it out of here. Hey, man, don't get pissed off, but go ahead. But if nobody likes it, it's your fault. Well, of course, the thing went viral. And it's an iconic logo to this day.